Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Michael Bruntz here on a Thursday. We've had a little bit of a disruption in our schedule of it being bye week, but we still wanted to get back to you with another Husker247 Podcast. Bruntz, how's your bye week been so far?
Productive. Lots of stuff to do around the house. Coaches are on the road now. Heard from Matt Rule Monday, so it's been good. I don't mind the two bye weeks in a year. Like I don't hate that. So, and it also kind of lets you kind of recharge the batteries before the last 3 weeks, whatever this is going to be, plus recruiting and everything else that is going to go on, which we can get into in the second part with the new recruiting calendar this year being a little different.
I feel like you just named the podcast for the day. It's going to be the Husker247 Podcast, whatever this is going to be.
I mean, isn't that basically what the last 3 games are? Like,
yeah, I mean, after the way Saturday played out this past weekend, I mean, I think that's a fair assessment of it, because it could be lots of different things. It could be Nebraska figuring it out and finding a way to get to a 6th win. It could be Nebraska taking care of some teams that you've been waiting to see if they can beat. It could be Nebraska going to LA and jump-starting USC's, finish to their season. You could have a 5-5 Nebraska and a 5-5 Wisconsin. Winner gets to go to New York City. I see you just grimacing there.
Or the Rate Bowl. The Rate Bowl.
Or the Rate Bowl.
No longer guaranteed. Just rate.
Do you think the Rate Bowl regrets its name slightly?
I don't know. I mean, it's the company name, right? Like they're not. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. It's on the edge of being concerning for me. If you say it too fast, if you don't enunciate clearly, it gets a little awkward. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, they can't guarantee that rate anymore. Apparently, it's too flexible. So it's funny, doing these bowl projections all year. The changeover.
Are people still yelling at you about doing bowl projections? That's good. That's nice. Consistency is always nice.
But the name changes of the bowls since Nebraska last went to a bowl game, it's like a lot of the companies like didn't even exist when Nebraska last went to a bowl game. So you got to learn these things on the fly, I guess.
Yeah, well, that is true. That is true. All right, let's dive into some news that happened early in the week after Matt Rule kind of hinted at it on his Monday press conference. Dana Holgorsen, Phil Snow joins Nebraska as consultants, longtime coaches each. Dana Holgorsen's been a head coach Houston. He was a head coach at most recently West Virginia. And then Phil Snow, longtime Matt Rule assistant, was with him with the Panthers and Baylor and Temple and lots of different stops. Let's start with Phil Snow first, because I think we're going to have a longer discussion on Dana Holgorsen. What was your sort of initial reaction? It could be about both of them, but if you could maybe try to tailor it just specifically about Phil Snow and Nebraska choosing to do this at this point in the season.
I'll tailor it to Snow. The Snow thing didn't surprise me as much, and it didn't. My ears didn't perk up as much with that, because I guess in my mind, there's kind of like the Matt Rule orbit, and there's coaches that have been
Matt
with Matt
Rule universe.
Yes,
do you want to just go with that?
Yeah. They're rotating around him, just constantly, like planets. And Phil Snow is very much like one of the more prominent planets in the Matt Rule orbit, and so that doesn't surprise me as much. I mean, he knows, he's worked with Rob Dvorak, he's worked with Terrence Knighton. There's that familiarity there. He's a veteran coach. I mean, that didn't surprise me as much. And I guess it's a little awkward because it's Tony White's defense. It's a different scheme than what Phil Snow ran. But at the same time, maybe just like some outside eyes on certain guys, or the way that practices are being run. I mean, maybe that helps the defense a little bit. And as I kind of talk through that, the personnel side of it, like the players involved, there's a lot of young players on defense. A lot of guys that are kind of, in the second, third teams that are lurking behind these veterans that came back. And I do wonder if that extra set of eyes maybe helps one of those guys emerge, or maybe you kind of say, what about this guy in this position, moving guys around? Why isn't this guy playing more? That kind of thing. I think that's probably more of the value there that he brings to the defensive side of the ball, unless I'm just completely missing something here.
I don't know if you're missing anything. The timing of it just feels curious because there's 3 weeks left to go. You've made this decision, during your bye week. As you said when we talked about this on the phone here earlier today, and we were just shooting the breeze, you kind of mentioned that, you would expect that Matt Rule and Phil Snow talk all the time. So I would assume between Phil Snow and Dana Holgorsen, he probably has a better grasp of what is here in Lincoln. I would imagine he's also watched Nebraska football more than what Dana Holgorsen has done in that regard. It was sort of unique because to me, I'm just, if I'm Tony White, it would be hard to see that and not wonder, like, is this, you're basically going to your longtime friend that's a defensive coordinator and asking for help. I would be wondering what that means going forward. Like, is this just a short-term thing? Is Phil Snow going to be involved in the operation through the offseason into next year? Is there a chance that if a position were to open up, he would be a defensive assistant? It's just kind of curious. Like, that's where I'm at with it. I don't know what to do with all of it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's. I mean, he's what, 68 years old,
Right?
Like
Well, that's the other thing, and maybe it's just giving him something to do, and you want him here for the final push of the season, to just get that around the program for a few weeks.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to insinuate that he's here to take anybody's job or that Tony White should be, furious. It's just sort of an odd. The timing of it just strikes me as odd, and unlike the other name that we're going to talk about, I don't know. I'm a little less sure of what help that you will get there other than just an extra set of eyes, I
yeah.
guess.
I mean, that could just be it, right?
Yeah.
Like
Well, and it's quite possibly like I'm over here trying to ascribe something to it that isn't remotely the case.
yeah,
It's just, that's kind of what we do.
yeah. No, that's fair, and it's both of the conversations about the guys in town too, or is it's like, well, we haven't heard from Matt Rule yet about it, Like
Right.
what?
Right.
I mean, certainly the offensive side of the ball, given everything that's happened this year, is much more interesting. And I don't get the sense that Dana Holgorsen came in January just to go to a wrestling match or a wrestling meet. Like I'm sure he had other things he could have been doing that week than watching Nash Hutmaker wrestle. But I think defensively of the two, I would be more likely to believe like, okay, it's just a longtime confidant and somebody that you listen to, is coming in to take a look. Other coaches do this. Like it's not unique to Nebraska, but the offensive side is more interesting to me.
Yeah.
I think in most people, just because like there seems to have been some mutual interest in being involved in some form or fashion there for the last 11 months.
Yeah. So let's dive into that. Dana Holgorsen, just like Phil Snow, being brought in as a offensive consultant, analyst, whatever the word that you want to use. This one is really interesting given all of the issues Nebraska has offensively, but also just given Dana Holgorsen's track record. I mean, this is a guy that has had a lot of experience working with a variety of different quarterbacks. He's been an offensive coordinator. He's been a quarterbacks coach. He's been a head coach. He's had high-flying passing offenses in the past. He's had effective offenses in the past. And he's coming here to help, with an extra set of eyes and potentially some ideas, a very stale, dormant offense that has regressed massively in the passing game over the last month. I guess if you were to sort of, assume and put your best guess forward, what do you think Dana Holgorsen will be able to help with over these final few weeks?
Yeah, it feels like it's more of a fine-tuned situation to me than like you're not. I would be absolutely floored if Nebraska appears in Los Angeles running anything significantly different than what they've done.
Right.
Like, you're this far into the season, you are practicing Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week. Like, what overhaul are you actually going to do in that time period? Not much. Like, maybe where it helps, and you kind of rattled off where he's coached and what he's coached. He's also coached wide receivers. Like, he's a wide receiver coach also by trade. And that seems to me like maybe an area where you can help with some of the issues that have happened that are more technique type stuff, or the way things are being coached and the blocking and separation on routes, things like that. Maybe the types of routes that you're running. But it that feels like it's more of a fact finding mission in some ways, and also a way to get a sense of maybe small things here and there that can help Nebraska a lot to find something that they can rely on. Like, I think that's more of the benefit over these last 3 weeks in like the on the field stuff now. Like, something Matt Rule said on Monday that kind of caught my eye was, the focusing on what they're game planning on during the week. Like, that might be where a veteran offensive coordinator maybe helps you a little bit in terms of what the types of things you're doing during the week, helping you on Saturday. Because I don't. I mean, I don't see him like taking the headset in the middle of the USC game or anything like that. Like, it feels like it's much more of just kind of sharing ideas, I guess, is probably the best way to put it.
Concepts and design.
Yeah. Yeah, like
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think I think that's fair.
like
I think that's
am
fair.
I is there anything that he could bring to the table? Like, I mean, obviously he's associated with like air raid and throwing the ball all over the place, but his offenses have tended to run the ball pretty well too, along with that, which I think some people don't give him enough credit for.
Yeah, I've had some interesting conversations on this, including with, people that have played a lot of football at high levels. And one of the comments from them is that you never see, like, they would be shocked if Dana Holgerson is calling plays or that things would look significantly different because the verbiage and everything that you've asked college kids to basically learn and know and have played under for 9 games can't change dramatically in 2 weeks in order for you to go out and be successful against USC. And um, Holgerson also would need to learn that verbiage to then be able to spit it out in the time of needed to call the play over the headset to Dylan Raiola. So I just don't think you're gonna hear one. I don't think publicly you're gonna hear that Marcus Satterfield has lost play calling duties, regardless of what happens. I don't think that's going to be said publicly. It might be intimated, it might be said privately, whatever. I just don't think you're going to get that as an on the record statement. And then, secondly, I don't think, regardless if that were happening, I don't think that Dana Holgerson would be the one on the headset calling plays because I just think there's too much. He hasn't been around long enough to be able to do that comfortably. But could he be up there basically pointing out what he's seeing and to what you said with setting up your game plan, like helping align so stuff that you've been working on, isn't going missed, or to kind of provide some guardrails for the type of offense or what you're trying to accomplish in a game so it feels less at random. I think that's entirely possible. And then, the other part of this is it just a precursor to ultimately having him as your offensive coordinator in 2025, letting him getting into town and seeing what Nebraska has to work with before the signing period, before the transfer portal were to start, so he can emphasize what areas that would need to be addressed in an offense if you're going to make this move. That strikes me as probably the most likely of all of this, is to let him get a feel for the personnel, let him get a feel for what he would need if this is what's going to happen at some point. And so then he can put together the laundry list of what he's going to want as you get into the player, procurement process that's going to start here in the next month. So that's sort of where I've arrived on it. I don't expect a wholesale different Nebraska offense at any point over these final 3 games. And I don't think most people do either. But it's quite possible that he could help you in terms of, play design, concept, that sort of thing leading up to Saturday, and maybe have more of a minimized role while the game is actually going on. That seems most likely to me at this point.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant by like the fact-finding piece. Like, it's more, I could see information collection like being part of that conversation, and I mean that's even, when you going back to Phil Snow, I mean maybe that's where, looking at the personnel that you have now and kind of saying, well, this is kind of what I see you need to add, or this is where you're a little deficient. I mean, I could see that being the defensive and the offensive side of the ball. So, yeah, it's I don't know, like what, apart from like the Snow and Holgorsen, like what do you think? I guess where do you think this team is at after 9 games? Because the November has started on the same trajectory that last November started on, and I mean the last 3 games you're playing a USC team that's reeling as bad or worse as Nebraska. Is starting a new quarterback against Nebraska. You got Wisconsin that just went and got its doors blown off against Iowa, and you've got Iowa that all of a sudden has a pulse offensively, and everybody's just don't know what's going on. But what do you kind of make, I guess, of how this month sets up? Because it's going to be a busy month. You still have the possibility of a bowl game out there, despite how dire it feels.
Yeah.
And you got a lot of seniors and guys that aren't going to be back next year who are kind of getting towards the end of their careers and can kind of hear that clock ticking a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's imperative that Nebraska figures out how to take one, if not more than one of these games this month, just because you need to be able to show progress. I mean, if you go back-to-back 2 5-7 seasons in a row, you've lost a ton of goodwill from this fan base. You've wasted a veteran team. You wasted a 5-1 start. You have proven that you're incapable of winning in the Big Ten at a pretty large degree, I would say. More than likely, you've been outcoached in a lot of those situations. So, yeah, Nebraska can't really afford that. Like, you can't afford that conversation. So they have to figure out how they're going to win at least a game, if not more, and how you take advantage of other teams that are also going through it. I mean, that's part of it to me that is frustrating, is that when Nebraska has opportunities to play a 2-5 UCLA team, other programs are able to make UCLA look like a 2-5 team. Nebraska makes UCLA look like they're the best version of itself for an entire half, and then to start the second half. Why? Why did you do that to Michigan State a year ago?
Mm-hmm.
We, had the hypothesis that it was a road game and you couldn't get up for it and you started slow. Guess what? It was a home game. If you couldn't get up for it, what the hell are you doing in college football as a coach or as a player? This is the whole point of why you're there. Honestly, if you can't get up for one of 12 games on your schedule, you shouldn't be there. And I know that's how Matt Rule feels because they're trying to accumulate guys who want to play football. But not to completely lose the thread of what we're talking about here, but the idea is they have to figure out how they're going to take advantage of teams that are struggling. You're going to get a Wisconsin team that, unless they upset the number 1 team in the country, is going to be 5-5 and absolutely backed into a corner. And if this sounds familiar, it's the same damn version of Wisconsin you played the last 2 years that you couldn't put away. So what's going to be different? I guess we'll find out when they get to that game. So, to me, it's imperative. They have to, we talked about different versions or different games where it's a kitchen sink thing or you've got nothing left to lose. They have everything to lose and everything to gain. And they have to play that way for 3 games in November to figure out how to win one of those, if not more than that. And if you can put one foot in front of the other and show progress, people around here are willing and excited to buy into everything else that you're doing. But if you continue to suck on Saturdays, no one's going to care. No one's going to listen to it. We're going to have to talk about off-season championships again. That's the reality of where Nebraska football is. So, if it takes bringing in Dana Holgorsen and Phil Snow or whatever it is, they have to try everything. And right now, I mean, your coaches are out on the road recruiting. And so they're going to have a week where they'll get back into it for USC. You're going to have a new quarterback. Guarantee you Lincoln Riley is going to have some different looks. You know what nobody in the media or the fan base wants to hear the next time Matt Rule's talking after a game? That the other team did something different than what you were expecting on film. Nobody wants to hear that. You go do something than what they were expecting on film. You go be different. You be the team that the coach has to talk about in the press conference. That's what they have to be in November. They have to be different than what they've been for the last year. They have to be different than they've been for the last month and a half. There's your mid-show rant that you didn't know that you were inviting.
It was pretty tame, I thought, for the most part.
Well, it's Thursday of a bye week. How fired up can I get, really?
Yeah. No, it's a good point. I don't know how different Nebraska will do in terms of like what they do, but the how they do it needs to get a lot better. Like I think that's been the hard part over this 3 games is like this 3-game stretch. I mean, you just get your ass kicked by Indiana. You play relatively well against Ohio State and look like a team that belongs on that field, and then you just completely,
embarrass yourself.
Look lost against UCLA. Like the how needs to get better, and I think that's been the frustrating part of the last 2 seasons. Is you would hope that the how you look starts to look better this time of year. And like Nebraska's supposedly been building for that, but it hasn't played out at all. And I think that's a large part of the frustration. I'm curious this, like, it feels like the Holgorsen thing though has kind of like, has it eased a little bit of tension this week? Like for some reason, it's like, it's felt a little less pitchforky, I guess. And like whatever the future is going to hold, it's at least I think been a little bit of a hey, look over here, like, which it's a bad thing. Like,
well, I think it speaks to the idea that Matt Rule is willing to do things to try to change the course of how it's going.
Yeah.
So rather than in the past where it has seemed blatantly obvious that one area is holding back what is happening, whether that be Kevin Cosgrove or, what have you. There's at least seems to be the attempt that things are going to change.
Yeah.
And it also helps there's no game on Saturday. I think people are saving their pitchfork energy for whatever time on Saturday on November 16th, so like I do think there's at least that, but you're right in the sense that like, if nothing else, Matt Rule has said that he will use every available resource he has to try to get Nebraska back to where it needs to be. This at least speaks to that.
Yeah.
I don't know that 21 games in his tenure speaks to it, but at least the idea that you're willing to do something different or bring in outside help at this stage in the game, however much that can help you, is not nothing. And people appreciate that. That's my guess of the situation.
It's not nothing. That's an even newer name for the podcast. It's not nothing.
Yeah, I don't hate that one either. The Husker247 Podcast. It's not nothing.
It's not nothing.
All right. Let's talk some recruiting. Nebraska's on the road. So one of the things that's fascinating, you have this sort of change and you have these guys coming in as analysts and they're, working with your players or they're watching your practices. Right now, your head coach isn't even there. He's been on the road for the last couple of days. He'll be on the road again tomorrow. Nebraska's out recruiting. We've talked about the player procurement process. They obviously have their 2025 recruiting class. The transfer portal coming up. And yet, as of today, here on November 7th, the big news on a Thursday, Matt Rule is going to see a 5-star recruit and a guy that I think Nebraska has a very, very legitimate chance of landing in Jackson Cantwell on Thursday. He saw Malcolm Simpson the night before. He's going to see other recruits as well. But Bruntz, it's got to stand out to you that Matt Rule on the bye week, the last time that he's really going to be able to get out, before the early signing period, they want to go see a 2026 in Nixa, Missouri. And not only is he a 5-star, there's a real path to him being at Nebraska. I believe that because of the connections, the fact he's been up here, his familiarity with everything, and he really likes the coaching staff. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it's noteworthy. I mean, I think you and I have talked about this a lot, that it feels like Nebraska's more in the running there than maybe what they're getting credit for nationally. He's obviously made trips to Nebraska whenever he's been able to do that. I think, my sense too is that I think he just clicks with Matt Rule. I mean, Matt Rule's been handling a lot of his recruitment. Even, when Cantwell was here, was he there for the Colorado game? Was that the one he was up for? Like, you could tell that there was like a level of comfort when he was talking to Matt Rule at midfield, because they talked for quite a while, but it did not seem like two guys that were like unfamiliar with each other at all. Like it felt
been around him 4 times, I think, to that point.
Yeah. I mean, and you've talked to him more than I have, but I mean, I think Cantwell is probably not your, what's the best way to say? I think he kind of approaches the process maybe a little bit differently than you would expect the number 2 recruit in the country to approach it. Is that fair to say?
I think, and I don't want people to overemphasize this, I think personality-wise and achievement-wise, he's very similar to Grant Bricks. Now,
Yeah.
the difference there is that he does interviews and Grant Bricks really, really didn't. So there's a big difference in terms of that. But who these guys are, not talking about the interview thing, they're high achievement people. They are very interested in football, but they're outstanding students. They're very interested in football, but they're also really social and involved in their school. And, in the case of Cantwell, I think he's like a 4.0 student that scored really highly on the ACT, like is smart beyond just being able to know a football playbook or the ABCs or what have you. So, I mean, and Grant Bricks connected really, really well with Matt Rule, like really well. Matt Rule, far more than Donovan Raiola, is the reason that Grant Bricks felt good about Nebraska. I suspect it would be similar for Jackson Cantwell too. Not that and he likes Donovan Raiola. Not that there isn't a relationship there, but as you sort of said, I think there's a connection that he has with Matt Rule that maybe he's not going to have with every other head coach. And Nebraska would be wise to continue to kind of try to deepen that, strengthen that, and see if that helps you win out.
Yeah, and it's like a visit like this is not uncommon for what Matt Rule has done. And I think, if you go back to like previous recruiting cycles, it feels like in January, a lot of time has been spent on like the top targets for the next year. Like he did that with Bricks, where he
went to the wrestling match.
Went to the wrestling match. There were other visits that he made. He was in St. Louis, seeing some guys that are towards the top of the board. I mean, this kind of falls in line with that. I think it's happening a little bit earlier because the calendar change has been different. But I mean, I think it makes sense where, like, there's not a lot of work left to do on 2025. There's some, like, don't get me wrong, but you have that ability to work ahead a little bit. I mean, you're seeing assistants out on the road really getting on 2026 prospects and getting into schools. So that makes a lot of sense. And especially if he's right in your back, I mean, not in your backyard, but he's in the radius, it makes sense to get down there and see him. So I think it's a smart move. It's a signal that, he's a big priority. Obviously he would be, given the talent that he is, but you're putting in the work there as well.
Let's finish with this recruiting wise. We are very much in flip season, and just hearing from different people involved in recruiting operations, it could be really wild. And Nebraska is one of those teams that's been very aggressive. And what I want to ask you, Bruntz, when you look at some of the guys that they're trying to flip, is there a player that stands out to you as you're, I don't, not even that you'd be confident that Nebraska would get him, but it would represent something to you if they're able to pull this off?
Well, I mean, Dawson Merritt, I mean, that's still out there. I mean, that would be what I would consider a big win if they're able to get that over the finish line. I mean, it feels like there's still an interest on his part that Nebraska
100% still interested.
could be a place for him. Matt Rule was down there during the first bye week at his game. So Nebraska has not given up the pursuit. And I mean, he's the kind of playmaker that you need to kind of continue to add to your defense. I mean, that's a key position in that defense, and that would be a really big addition for Nebraska if they're able to complete that. So that's probably, I would put him ahead of like Chase Lofton, although Lofton would be a really important get, but I think Merritt would just kind of show Nebraska's longevity in that recruitment, because it feels like they've been recruiting him for years.
Yeah. For me, even more than the Jordan Allen and Corey Sims talk, if they're able to pull off Cortez Mills, like when you were talking about that in January, Nebraska had done a good job of getting out to see their targets. Cortez Mills is one of those guys. This is someone they've been recruiting for a while. They have a good relationship there. I think the door is still open. Nebraska has communicated with him regardless of his commitment status. That is one I'd still have some real curiosity when we get to signing day. Is he really going to end up at Oklahoma? Not convinced of that. And then if he's there, is the same guys recruiting him still going to be there? Because that program, more than the one in Lincoln, I think there's some real angst about how things are going. Because their first foray into the SEC, other than your defense saving a win against Auburn, not looking great. Not looking great for Oklahoma. So keep an eye on Cortez Mills as well. Anything else you want to throw in here as we get ready to depart? Any other names potentially for the podcast?
No, I mean, to your flip conversation, though, I mean, we didn't talk about Chase Lofton. I mean, that he was on campus for the UCLA game. You talked to him afterwards. I mean, when you kind of look at what Nebraska has done with in-state recruiting, I mean, he's kind of the final piece to 2025 if they're able to complete that flip. And also, I mean, he's kind of that unicorn weapon, tight end, wide receiver that would feature very nicely in an offense that can throw the ball downfield.
Yeah, I think Nebraska has a great chance of landing Chase Lofton. We'll see if he ends up making a visit to either Missouri or Texas A&M. I think Florida State, with their situation, is concerning for him and his family, because you don't necessarily want to go there if there's a coaching change that could be potentially coming. And I just think Nebraska is similar to Cortez Mills and Dawson Merritt. Nebraska never stopped recruiting him. It's also, interesting, like Garrett McGuire has been really involved in that recruitment. I think Marcus Satterfield and Keith Williams were the earlies. And then now, he told me that Garrett McGuire is probably the guy. He talks to everybody on staff, but Garrett McGuire maybe more than anyone else. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Garrett McGuire has done a nice job recruiting for Nebraska in some situations. And so, we'll see if that potentially pays off. But more than Merritt and Mills, I feel good right now about Nebraska potentially flipping Chase Lofton. Then there's the other side of it, because if you end up with Chase Lofton, that opens up a tight end spot for Florida State, and Florida State really likes Jeremiah Jones, who Nebraska views as a defensive athlete or just an athlete in general from Kentucky. So do they then go full bore for that? What is his interest? Because right now I think they've got the offer out and they're in conversations, but it hasn't really picked up a lot. So a lot can happen here in the month of November as we're leading up to the early signing period in December. And that means that you want to keep it at Husker247.com, where we got all the coverage of that. We got plenty of national coverage. Just had a series of videos released of looking through Nebraska's 2025 class. Guys like Tom Loy and Andrew Ivins, Cooper Patagna, giving their thoughts on guys who could be an early impact player at Nebraska, maybe guys who have NFL potential. So we'll have some of those videos will be dropping on the site and in stories as well. So be sure to check all of that out at Husker247.com. For Michael Bruntz, I'm Mike Schaefer. We're Husker247. We'll catch you next time.